Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I am Frank Capello.
And I'm Rivka Rivera. And Frank, this is our 15th episode.
I can't believe it already.
I know.
It's wild.
I know. 15 is, I'm sure people talk about it like, whoa, like one time we'll be at like 100 at some point and it'll be crazy. But I just, in reflecting on this and this process, because this has been such a new medium for me and it's been so much fun, 15 feels like a lot. And the journey, I was just thinking about how when I talk about the experience so far with friends, I'm always saying how I'm so grateful for the speed at which we turn these around, because we're doing them weekly, which is a lot of work and a lot of movie watching.
Oh, yeah. It's more work than you might think.
Than I perhaps thought. But I'm enjoying it, and we feel like we're finding our stride, and we're getting it. But what's been crucial for me about it is that because we're editing and putting out the podcast, there's not time to sit on it, and there's not time to overthink. You know, we're watching the movie, we're putting our thoughts together. And for me, that's been pretty liberating, because I struggle with a lot of perfectionism, and I know that a lot of people struggle with perfectionism. So I just thought it would be cool to just touch base and have a little convo in our first block here about particularly the culture of perfectionism under capitalism, and how, you know, that the fact that I'm struggling with it it's not like a me issue. It's like it's like a we issue.
So let me ask you, as we are putting these things out, is there like a part of you that like starts getting itchy? That's like, oh, that thing could have been better. I could have done that better. Or like, we should have trimmed this up. Like the fact that we're, you know, by nature of having a weekly release schedule, you just kind of have to put something out every week. Does that kind of trigger your perfectionism?
You know, no, it's been freeing, because I think it would be impossible to let my, you know, if my perfectionism took over, there would be no show. So I'm loving exploring that. And certainly there's, you know, we listen to these over and I think, oh, wow, I literally said that word wrong, or you know, but I love it because I can laugh at myself. And I think that's like so frankly anti-capitalist, you know, and
Sure.
It's been really healing to explore that capacity, because what are you going to do? It's out, you know. I think I said, like, at the end of a movie, the ending credits, I called them reels. And like, like whatever, like small things like that to bigger things where I'm like, I can't believe we talked about that movie and I didn't mention this thing, or it wasn't like
that happens
perfectly
with me too.
phrased. Or of course, anyone who's in these mediums, I use this, I say like, or I say this, or I say that a lot. And what's important to know contextually is that the function of perfectionism and capitalism is crucial to making the whole thing turn, right? So there's this idea of a meritocracy that if we just strive hard enough, we'll get the rewards and status. And if we don't strive hard enough, then, you know, we won't get those things. This is like up to us. And there's this competition, which means like someone's going to do it better based on this metric that has been set for us. And so the goal is doing the best in order to literally survive, and so the definition of success becomes so narrow. And we've talked about this many times of like having to, in part of the recovery from like waking up to the matrix of capitalism is being able to widen your definition of success. But because I think when you talk about perfection, it lands in so many different areas, right? It's like, first of all, if perfectionism is this some ideal, who is setting that ideal? And in America, under the like white patriarchal colonial framework, like those things become very limiting and one-dimensional and deeply harmful for anyone who's pursuing them.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, so I think on that level of that kind of perfect, but it's really like, it was just interesting to see how it showed up in the development of this show. Just, in the past, I would say like the consequences of that kind of perfectionism for a creative would be, if I can't say it perfectly or get my ideas out in a way that I think is acceptable or the best version of that, then I won't speak at all.
Yeah.
And I think that that literal censorship is so dangerous. And I think one of the things that can combat that idea of perfectionism that I'm trying to adopt and live by and remind myself of when these things come in is speaking in draft. That we always have permission to say, oh, I learned something new, and so I'm going to rewrite the way I think about things and the way that I'm going to say those things, because everything is evolving. And I think being able to embrace that evolution and recognize there's never going to be a perfect version of the thing, so don't wait to speak, has been helpful for me, because that's definitely been my journey. And one of the fears about being on doing a podcast, what happens if you realize you said something wrong and then it's out there? So yeah, that's kind of where this idea has been sitting with me, but I've just it's been really healing to just be in it and literally practicing it.
Thank you for sharing all of that. That's so interesting that perfectionism, I mean, it conjures a lot of things, but what it sounds like to me, what your experience is sort of the perfectionism of living within this system that has these, like you said, white patriarchal colonial standards and framework that because of its control over so much of our society, it feels like you have to adhere to those standards and are striving for perfectionism within that. But when you brought up perfectionism to me, the first thing that I thought about was competition, which is also a very capitalist concept. The perfectionism of needing to do the thing better than the person that you will be competing with. The perfectionism of I have to be the absolute best, the absolute most perfect, because if I am not, then I will not get XYZ thing that I want. And because we live in a meritocracy, which that's bullshit. Meritocracy is fictional. We're being facetious here. But because I live in a meritocracy, perfectionism will get me there. And I used to live in that mindset, man, for such a long time, especially when I lived in LA and I was, when I was still trying to break into the writing industry and the comedy industry out there, just going over scripts over and over and over again, just with a fine-tooth comb, and just being like, oh, if I change a that to a which, or if I change this line to this, maybe that will be the thing that sets me apart, that wins this script competition, or gets in front of this agent or manager. And I think attention to detail is important, and specificity is important. Those are artistic tendencies, but the perfectionism is, it's an impossible standard, because it's all subjective. Who's judging what is perfect? A friend said to me at one point, he was like, when is your art complete? And I was like, I don't know. When is it complete? The answer is 5 minutes before you have to turn it in. And I think he actually, now that I'm saying it back out loud again, I'm realizing that he was saying it in a way that was like, you should always be working on the thing up until the point where you have to hand it off to somebody, which I think actually leans into that perfectionism. But it does kind of conjure the idea that because art is subjective, because creativity is subjective, you could just keep tinkering with it forever. You could just keep, going over it and trying to make it better and more perfect. But, sometimes there's beauty in messiness, and sometimes there's, you have to be able to let go in order to grow.
Well, I think that what's interesting about it is how deep it can, just all of these things. It's not, and it's not just some political or economic system, right? It's it is a culture that seeps into your very being and how you live. And so the reason we're so passionate about looking through a critical lens about this stuff is because it can truly liberate and change your total existence, right? I know it does that for me with writing, or even, whatever works. But if you can be like, wait, I heard this thing, I wonder where that came from. Often I'll these ideas that I used to consider just, the way that it is, because that's what I heard about being a creative. And then once you can be critical of them and you're like, oh, actually, does that align with me being the most free and the most excited about creating? For me, deadlines can be helpful, and sometimes they can be really harmful. And who decided on that structure and why? Yeah. And often those kind of things do come back to some kind of production value. Well, because you need it done by this time so that you can make, whatever those things are, and they can be tools, but you can liberate yourself from the things that don't work. Yes, I want to be able to think about what I say before I say it, but also, like, if that's going to choke you up and not let you speak, go out and just start talking and be wrong. Like, be willing to be wrong, I think, is sort of the exploration I'm at. And if you cause harm, be accountable for it and learn from it and be willing to evolve.
Yes. That's the very
and
important.
that's part of it, though, is like, you have to be willing to do that piece out loud too, I think, in order to continue moving forward, exploring whatever that idea of success is, which is, for me, I think at this point, whatever's going to liberate everyone in a very broad sense.
So I think this is really important. I'm glad that you brought it up for us to chat about.
I'm grateful to just the community that we've slowly started building through doing this show, and people who've written in responses. I think it's been a conversation, which is what we, obviously not on the air with us, but to be in conversation. And I think to, like, even not necessarily agree with something someone says, but be able to take that in and keep moving forward is part of this whole deal also.
Yeah, that's fucking life, baby.
Life, baby.
All right, we should get to our interview today. Oof, this is a fun one. You've Got Mail. Before we do, just want to let you all know that this podcast is produced by the two of us.
We perform all of the necessary labor to make this show happen.
And as we're trying to practice our anti-capitalist values, we will not be selling ads on this show. We rely completely on community support to keep the show going. So if you're able to support us, please consider subscribing to our Patreon.
For just $5 a month, you get access to our entire back catalog of premium episodes, and you'll be directly supporting this show. You can also leave us a one-time contribution in our tip jar, and you can find all of those links in the episode description in your podcast player or by going to mvcpod.com.
You can also help us out for free by leaving a rating and review for this show on your podcast player. It only takes a few seconds, and it is very helpful in boosting the algorithm and getting this show in front of more people, so we really appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with our conversation about You've Got Mail with Robin Johnson.
We are so happy to be joined by Robin Johnson, she, her. She's an artist, activist, and magic maker, an actor turned director. Her filmmaking debut, Beach Day, currently making the rounds in the festival circuit, challenges female archetypes in cinema and explores grief and rage through a supernatural lens. When she isn't making art, Robin works at the communications department at the ACLU, drinks too much coffee, I can relate, and tries to pet every dog she passes on the streets of New York City. Welcome, Robin. It's so great to have you on Movies versus Capitalism.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat today.
So we were connected to you through our mutual friend and also guest on the podcast, Ryan Christian.
Friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod. Yeah, I love that phrase. Friend of the pod.
It's the official terminology. We have to use it.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just so nice to connect with an artist who's also shares the politics that we have. And I'm curious, you say you work at the ACLU as well. You have this film that's just coming out. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. So Ryan and I have known each other for years. We met working on a heartbreaking play about Emmett Till, in which I played Carolyn Bryant and he played Emmett Till. So doing something like that will really bond you with somebody. So we became quite close, pretty fast. And something he and I share, which I know he mentioned when he was on the pod, was that as an artist, we both are drawn to projects that align with our values, our anti-capitalist values, anti-racist values, all of those values. I actually formally gave up acting in 2020. The pandemic hit and I didn't miss it. I had been doing a lot of commercial work, and doing a lot of commercial work as an actor is frustrating, as I'm sure you know, you're like, my craft, but doing a lot of commercial work as an anti-capitalist is like, just pull your hair out. How many times can I, go in and try to convince people to buy a vacuum cleaner they don't need, all of that stuff. So I broke up with my agent in 2020 and I started writing my own stuff. just made this film. We finished it in February of this year. We started it in 2021. It's currently in the festival circuit. It is called Beach Day. It will be available to view eventually. We'll get to all of the how you can contact me later. But when I gave up acting professionally, I knew I wanted to find a way to survive in capitalism that was more in line with my values, and aggressively applied to every organization I admired. And I ended up at the ACLU. That's me in a little nutshell. Yeah.
That's such a lovely journey. And the one thing I want to say is, because I also gave up professional acting several years ago. And I like to draw the distinction of, I mean, for anyone out there, for any artist, for whatever, choosing not to pursue an art on a professional scale does not mean that you are not still that type of artist. So, like, while I was like, oh, I don't want to be a professional actor and like do the whole rat race, the commercial auditions, all that, I was like, I do still love acting and performing. So like being able to draw that distinction, I think, is really important, especially for people who are grappling with the pressures that the market system puts on our artwork. So
yeah, I'm so happy you brought this up like right at the top. I think it's so important to talk about. And what I heard in it is like that you're more an artist in some ways than ever. Like you're connecting with that, but you left the market, if you will.
Yeah.
Like kind of what you're saying, Frank, is just choosing not to be in the marketplace, which can be a really painful place to be. I'm still in said marketplace, and it's a considerable struggle, and can be okay. It can be great at times when you find projects that align, but more and more, I had an audition the other week that I just like looked at, was a commercial audition, and you're just like, the money, it doesn't add up. I'm going to lose money to show up for this job because our union has just, and between streaming, and we've talked about this before, it's just like so low. I will have to give up. I will have to like leave work, take off work. And when you're a freelancer, there's no vacation days. So it's just, it's an insane marketplace. And thank you for starting there. And speaking of the marketplace, you chose a incredible film for us to watch today.
Yeah, a movie that we have been waiting to get to. You chose You've Got Mail. Wow.
Yeah.
Directed by Nora Ephron, written by Nora and her sister Delia Ephron, starring Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, Greg Kinnear, Parker Posey, and Dave Chappelle. The budget was $65 million, and it made $250 million worldwide. Big ol' hit. This is the third movie with Hanks and Ryan together after Joel versus the Volcano and Sleepless in Seattle, which was also directed by Ephron. Synopsis of this movie, which is based on a 1937 play. This is the story of Kathleen Kelly, played by Meg Ryan, and Joe Fox, played by Tom Hanks, who met in a chat room for people over 30 and start anonymously writing romantic emails to each other, even though they're both in relationships. Little do they know, in real life, they are actually enemies because Joe Fox is a high-ranking executive at Fox Books, a corporate chain bookstore, which has just opened a new location on the Upper West Side, down the street from the shop around the corner, a beloved boutique children's bookstore, which Kelly not only owns and runs, but inherited from her dead mother. And from there, the drama ensues, and goddamn, a ton of drama in this film.
So some historical context for You've Got Mail. It was released on December 18th in 1988. Bill Clinton is president, and in January, he denies having sexual relations with his former White House intern, Monica Lewinsky. Smoking cigarettes is banned in all California bars and restaurants, but still, you can definitely still smoke other places at this time. The FDA approves Viagra, the first ever erectile dysfunction pill, and other movies that came out this year were Armageddon, The Big Lebowski, There's Something About Mary, The Truman Show, and A Bug's Life.
It's a good year.
It's a good year. I know. I was just thinking all those movies were so formative. America Online launched in 1989, but by 1995, it had 3 million active users. And Google Inc. is founded this year. The United States Department of Justice files an antitrust case against Microsoft. So Yes, this is the landscape in which this film releases.
It's the .com bubble. A lot of internet stuff happening.
A lot of
Early
stuff.
internet, this sort of like more charming version, I think, of the internet.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that this iteration of the internet in this movie. But Robin, first thing we like to start with is asking our guest, why did you choose this movie?
I chose this movie because, simply put, I hate this movie. And I know so many people who love this movie. And I can't talk about how much I hate it with all of these people. So I thought I could talk about it with you.
Yes.
No, I think growing up, this was one of my mom's favorite movies. I know a lot of people who love this movie. And I mean, if you strip away any sort of critical lens, you can kind of see why. It is very aesthetically charming, and it has America's sweethearts as the protagonists, and there are daisies coming out of Meg Ryan's eyeballs, and it's just there's a golden retriever, and it's very sweet. But it's actually, if you actually just listen to the dialogue a little bit, it is a capitalist horror story. And I actually think that this screenplay could very well have translated into a film with like a different tone and a different director and different actors. That would have been a very successful satire of like, you know, of capitalism and big business. It's not. It's done in earnest, but I just wanted to get into how horrifying this film is with y'all today. This beloved rom-com.
Yeah, I love everything you just said because I felt very similarly. Although I have a question: did you always feel that way, or did you come to that opinion, or were you always like a kid with your mom loving this, like, Mom?
No, I was very young when I watched this with my mom, so I had no concept of what capitalism was at all. And I was very taken by, you know, the chunky sweaters and the floppy nose haircuts, and like everything is so warmly lit, you know, and you
so
just feel like, yeah, you just want to cozy up with hot cocoa.
It's a great New York movie. It's like
Oh,
makes New York
yes.
seem so
New
romantic.
York in the fall.
It's New York
Get
in
out
the
your
fall.
school supplies. It's
Just
like,
go buy a
yes.
bouquet. Yeah. Ugh.
Smell some
Um,
Scotch tape. Yeah.
Yes, smell some Scotch tape, and then the springtime, and where are they? Riverside Park, and there's like the flowers blooming. It's very romantic. But then I watched it again as a teenager and realized what it is, and in watching it again for this podcast, even more horrifying things popped out to me.
Yeah, I agree. Every time I watch it, it's so odd. It becomes like simultaneously like more of a favorite movie and like more horrifying. It's like, it's one of those, it's so strange. And I agree. This movie is a horror movie. To me, it's a horror movie about capitalism. It's also like about the first catfish. It's this
Yes.
crazy man, Joe Fox, who just basically puts a woman who he stalks out of business and then gaslights the shit out of her. And then it's interesting. I think my big takeaway was just how it's a love letter to this very particular piece of capitalism, which is this moment in time during the Clinton administration when the neoliberal agenda is really being set, where it's like, essentially, people are so exhausted. Nobody wants to have to make a choice, or who wants to be political? Like, big business is gonna be big business, so you give in, fall in love. Let the man be like, you know, let the big
Yeah.
corporate man be the big
Yeah.
corporate man. And you know
Yeah.
what? If you just shut up and stop having opinions, something good might come from it. And like, that is the arc of this story.
She literally says at one point, I forgot to vote and I got a manicure. And I think that sums up exactly what you're saying. You know,
Yeah.
you need to disassociate a little bit and just fall in love and it's
Fall in
fine.
love with your capitalist oppressor. You know, fall in love with the big box store that is going to put you out of business. But you know what? At the end of the day, you're going to find out that the guy that runs that big box store, he's actually not that bad. Although he is. Joe Fox is. Joe Fox is. We'll get to Joe Fox as a character in a minute because there's so much to be said. But yeah, for anyone who hasn't rewatched this movie, basically like Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, they're falling in love, and he runs Barnes and Noble essentially. His family runs Barnes and Noble,
Or
she
Books
runs
a Million, really.
I actually read that they wanted to shoot in Barnes and Noble, and Barnes and Noble said no. There is a lot of product placement. There is actual AOL, there's
Wow.
actual Starbucks, and they wanted to use Barnes and Noble.
That's right.
And Barnes and Noble said no, please continue. Just wanted to throw that in there.
No, I think that's important because it's the movie is like slightly critical of the big box store, but then ultimately lands at a place of like, but it's kind of nice in here though.
You can do what you're gonna do here. Like, we make
Yeah.
it work, which she does. She
Yeah.
makes it work.
And the whole conceit is that, you know, his store, Fox Books, is putting her store that she inherited from her mother, is going to put her out of business. Meanwhile, they're falling in love both online and in real life. And it really softens any, because going in, I was like, maybe this is going to be a critique of capitalism and the way that like these hyper competitive markets,
That's how I
and especially
remember it.
that's how I kind of remembered it that way too. I was like, oh, this is going to tell us that the Barnes and Noble is bad. But as the movie, and there's some critical aspects of it, but I do want to play this one clip from the beginning when Joe Fox is explaining to Dave Chappelle what they're going to be doing here at this new Fox Books location.
Oh, no, this is Upper West Side, man. We might as well tell them we're opening a crack house. They're gonna hate us. As soon as they hear, they're gonna be lining up to
pick at the big bad chain store.
That's out there, just through it.
Everything they hold dear.
Yeah.
Do you know what? We are going to seduce them. We're going to seduce them with our square footage and our discounts and our deep armchairs and our cappuccino. That's right. They're going to hate us at the beginning, but
We'll get them in the air.
and you know why?
Why?
Because we're going to sell them cheap books and legal addictive stimulants. In the meantime, we'll just put up a big sign. Coming soon, a Fox Book Superstore, the end of civilization as you know it.
So it's like he's aware of how fucking terrible they are, but then they like put this little jaunty little jazzy piano underneath, and you're like, oh, this is actually kind of, and it's Tom Hanks. This is kind of nice.
And what's so insidious about that quote in particular is that that's what happens in their relationship as well, right? He's talking about that's how the Upper West Siders are going to react to Fox Books. But in the end, like, they're going to hate us, but in the end, they're going to love us. But that's what ends up happening with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. She hates him, but in the end, she loves him. And that quote can be applied to both of those situations, which is why I think this could have been an effective satire, but it's not. And you thought it was, or you thought it was a critique. And when you rewatched, you realized it's absolutely not.
And I've also thought about, like, this movie could have, it's not like, you know, some movies you're like, oh, it had to be that way to like, there's no reason this movie had to end or go this way. It could have been just as charming, as romantic, and it could have been the movie that I remembered it being in my head, which was very charming and romantic. And like, the little bookstore wins, and Joe Fox is just charming and not like, you can be a disgruntled and maybe have shit to work through that still gives some tension and conflict. But this particular tension and conflict was like not necessary to this charming film.
Yeah, it's not an equal playing field, right? Usually in these like enemies to lovers tropes, they're on a sort of equal playing field. But when someone is the oppressor in a larger societal sense, it doesn't really work. Frank, I know you wanted to get into Joe Fox as a character.
Oh yeah, no, but just
jump on it.
yeah. Oh my god, this fucking guy, Joe Fox. The last point I want to make to what you were just saying is, yeah, they're not on an equal playing field, and this movie, by the end of the movie, spoiler alert, her store, Meg Ryan's store, goes out of business. Kathleen's store is out of business. So she has lost her livelihood. She lost what her mother left to her. And at the end, she does, in fact, choose Tom Hanks. She has fallen in love with him. So it is a full-on endorsement of everything that has transpired so far in the movie. So it's like, it completely softens any like light critique that there might have been leading up.
Which is why we don't remember that, because it's so effective. And I think this is something we see time and time again with these movies, where like, I think about so many of them where you ask someone from the era about that film and what they tell you has nothing to do with what the movie's actually about. Like, I'm thinking about Saturday Night Fever, which I hope we do on this podcast soon. But like, that movie, based on like collective memory, is like a fun disco dancing movie. And then you watch it and you're like, that is not what this movie is at all. I don't even enjoy the dancing. It's crazy. So that was, I would put You've Got Mail in that category. I'd put like Manhattan in that category. Like everyone tells you, no, it's a very funny movie about New York. And you're like, this is a movie about pedophilia is what this movie is about. And that's plotline A. So like, I don't know. I just think there's something that's so effective about these films that is, I don't know about, I don't even know what I think about the word intentional at this point. Like if that even, matters really, but it's just fascinating that we keep identifying it.
Well, it's also such an amazing snapshot of 1998 because this is the time when people were worried about the big box stores putting the little independent mom and pop shops out of business. And now it's 2023 and Amazon has totally eaten Barnes and Noble's lunch. Like this movie has this movie has no economic relevance anymore today because the way that, tech and online marketplaces have completely upended the way that retail and distribution has worked. So it's such a unique snapshot of this specific time.
Except that you could do like the sequel, like you're saying, and the sequel would be now Joe Fox is like what I guess getting stalked and then falls in love with Jeff Bezos and like but the storytelling would be this, like we keep being told the same thing of like Amazon's too big, they're too big. Just like love it. It's so romantic. It's like, but it's such a dangerous narrative and so powerful.
Yeah, I would love to see Jeff Bezos catfish Joe Fox and just absolutely destroy his life. He deserves it. Yeah, let's get into Joe Fox. Robin, Joe Fox, pro or anti? The man of your dreams or a full-blown psychopath? What do you think?
Man of my dreams, obviously. Man of my nightmares. This movie is really banking on Tom Hanks in 1998 in order to make this at all work, obviously. Like, the most beloved, lovable guy. Anyone else playing this role, I do not think that the rom-com would have succeeded at all. There's a scene where he's in an office with his dad and his grandpa, and it's just like 3 generations of like generational wealth white guys. They literally laugh maniacally when he shares that another small business is going under, and they do like a pew 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 ha 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 ha. Like it is so over the top.
It's so gross.
It's so gross. And he continually lies to Meg Ryan. He's also cheating on Parker Posey the whole time. They're both cheating on their partners, right? And I mean, I forgot that too until this rewatch, and I was like, oh, they're cheaters as well. But we really are, the only reason I think the audience is washed over with that feeling is because it's Tom Hanks, and we get to see him playing at a fall harvest carnival with children and being adorable and carrying around a goldfish and having a golden retriever. But I mean, he is just awful till the end. Aside from the little thing of closing down her business, which he says at the end, by the way, that is a line. He's like, so for folks who don't remember, he has the upper hand at a certain point, and he knows that the person he's been anonymously communicating with is Kathleen Kelly, Meg Ryan's character, but Meg Ryan doesn't know that she's been communicating with Tom Hanks. She still thinks that he's like New York 5179 or whatever his screen name is. And she thinks that New York 519 or whatever stood her up on a date. And after breaking into her home, she's sick, and he's like, let me in. I want to apologize to you. And she's like, please don't come into my home. I'm sick. He comes in when someone else is leaving. And this is like the big romantic time, right? This is like the last 15 minutes of the movie. Like the resolution's coming. She's like, please don't come in. I'm sick. Also, I hate you. He breaks into her building, forces his way into her apartment unit. He sits on her bed while she's cozying up and blowing her nose. And she's like high on Dayquil and keeps pushing himself closer and closer to her. Like it does not stop. There is no line that this man will not cross. He's an evil villain. And in the horror movie version, he is grotesque and some sort of demonic creature.
I'm so with you. I feel like as I was taking notes for this, Robin, I texted Frank. I'm like, it's just turned into a list of red flags.
Yeah.
Like I was like, red flag 1. I mean, it starts with he's just lies to her from the top in the store when he meets her. He's like, oh, I'm not Joe Fox. And then, I mean, referencing The Godfather as eating red flag, scooping the caviar, red flag. the way he speaks to, there's this scene at Zabar's we have a fun cameo from Sarah Ramirez. And this scene's so important too, because it's teaching us as the audience, I think, how we're supposed to view him, because she's at like the top of the, doesn't have cash at Zabar's, great New York moment. And he comes in and they're all like, get off the line, lady, get off the line. And he comes in and he's so rude and condescending to Rose, who's at the cash register, played by Sarah Ramirez. He's like, Happy Thanksgiving, say Happy Thanksgiving back. And like basically
infantilizes her.
It's such disgusting behavior. But then she's like charmed by him at the end.
Right.
Which is like psychotic. And then he leaves and then she's rude to Kathleen. So like that scene is telling us like, no, you're supposed to, it's like not only is she being gaslit by him, I feel like there is gaslighting of us as an audience where we're watching something like, this is not okay. This is very not okay behavior, but everybody's charmed by it. So perhaps he is our leading man. And I think, as you were talking too, I was thinking, wow, it really is, again, this period of time under Clinton where I think the Democratic Party is sort of like creating this type of manipulation, which is not essentially, although I guess there's some sensuality in it. Essentially, but essentially, hey, we know this guy's an asshole. Like, we know, we know climate change is real. We know climate change is real. It's really bad. We're going to do everything to fight it. But then we're going to do the Willow Project. It's like this dual, which they do here. They're like, we know the Fox family is bad. Like that scene you were describing with the three men. The film is self-aware enough that like, this is the evil character. But maybe not. Like it's psychologically like horrible to go through.
They're also making Joe Fox look better by putting him up against more evil characters, right? Like Joe Fox is evil, right? But his dad and his grandpa are objectively worse. Like they have had millions of wives and have very young children and talk about them in such misogynistic terms, and they are objectively worse than him. And he kind of looks at them and he thinks about it and he's like, I don't really want to be like them, and moves out and lives in his boat and does a little internal thinking. And I think we're supposed to be like, wow, he's not as bad as daddy and granddaddy. He's a bad guy, but he's trying. But another thing the movie does to make Joe Fox look eligible is throw in so casually a plot point about Meg Ryan's maternal figure, played by Jean Stapleton. We don't have to get into all of it now, but there's just a throwaway scene, a throwaway line where Jean Stapleton, who has known Meg Ryan for years, was friends with her mother, is her quirky, surrogate mom type. Birdie gives her great advice. Birdie casually mentions that she fell in love, the love of her life ran Spain. And then we cut to a scene with Greg Kinnear and Meg Ryan going to the movies, and Greg Kinnear is like, she fell in love with Generalissimo Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator, and is, I think, rightfully aghast. And Kathleen Kelly is just like, yeah, she was in another country, right? And I think when I first watched this again, I was like, why was that thrown in there? Like, why would we make this sweet older woman have had a past with a genocidal maniac? I don't understand why this rom-com is doing that. And I think it's to hone in on the point that, like, well, love is love, like
love is love.
Maybe he was this fascist dictator, but you're gonna love who you're gonna love. And at least Joe Fox isn't Generalissimo Franco. He's just Joe Fox. He's a good guy.
Yeah, it's also, yes to everything you're saying, it's also emblematic of the mentality of, I guess, the baby boomer generation, because I think Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are both baby boomers, but one that has been far removed enough from the actual threat of fascism that their parents' generation had to deal with and endure and struggle through to overcome, that by the 90s, it's just a throwaway joke. It's like, oh yeah, I was in love with Generalissimo Franco. It's kind of funny. We don't actually we don't actually have any sort of material understanding of the horrors of fascism in the 20th century. So because we got everything that our parents built from the social democracy that, they created once they all got back from war. So like, it's just like a funny punchline for us.
Yes.
I mean, I guess it makes sense, but it's also extremely dangerous to lose sight of your history that much, because now our generations are now seeing the rise of fascism again in this country and other countries. And we're like, oh no, this is like a real threat that is ever present. And our parents' generation really fucking dropped the ball on that one. So it made sense for them.
It makes sense, and it's so frustrating because it is such good writing, right? It's
a great
brilliant.
screenplay.
It's such a great screenplay, doing all the telling all the wrong messaging when you really get down to it. So it's just like, oh man, great lines. Like, because in some ways I'm like, yes, exactly what you said, Robin. It sets up, but love is love. Who cares if the politician doesn't have the right politics? I love them. I'm their fan. I'm in love with them. I love Obama. I love Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I love, and it's like this blinding love. Like in some ways I was like, this is the Love is Blind before Love is Blind. And and I don't know if they would pass the test. Certainly Joe Fox was like, if she's a dog, I'm out. And so you're like, not the point, which we'll get back to. But I do think it sets up because the following scene is like Greg Kinnear, Frank Navasky's character. And then right after that scene she has with Birdie, they're sort of setting up that this is where she admits that she did. I don't even know if it's admitting, because she didn't really seem to even ever think about it. She's like, I didn't vote, I got a manicure. But he brings up the point of like, I could never be with someone who doesn't have my politics. And I think it's framed like that's supposed to be like, oh, somehow like that idea is antithetical to romance. Like romance should be, especially if we're following the logic of this story, romance is like throw everything, all your logic away. Throw all your values, your critical thinking, your sense of danger, your sense of like anything, throw it away, because love is love is love. And I don't know, my question to you both, how do you think about the idea of like being partnered, maybe long-term, if that's what you are into, that kind of monogamy, or just in dating someone with your own politics? Have you dated someone that like, because I was like, yeah, I wonder. I put it to the room.
Got it. So you're at, have we or would we?
Yeah, I'm getting a little personal is what's happening.
Date a fascist.
I'm going to say no.
Or maybe someone who has like have you dated a let's even say someone who doesn't align with your maybe they're like mid-range liberal and don't fully align with your lefty politics.
I think when I was younger, yes. Or I guess in a not very serious relationship. I think as I've gotten older, I mean, I am in a long-term monogamous relationship right now with an anti-capitalist. And I think as I got older, before, we met each other and I was dating, I would bring up politics really early on, like on the dating profile, to be like, here's the thing, I talk about it a lot. If you don't like that, this is not going to work out. That's just me personally. But I think when I was younger, there was more of a need to please and go along with others and not be as assertive about my points of view. That's just my particular journey. I think I hadn't, but I probably would have casually dated somebody with different political views for a little bit until it verged on being serious.
Yeah, pretty much the same. I have, when I was younger, casually dated people with different views, not repugnant views, like nothing like truly hateful, just like more I'm fiscally conservative, but socially liberal, like that type, like when I was younger, that was fine. I think for like in a long-term relationship, I definitely would want to be with someone that I had more aligned values and perspectives on, because otherwise you're just kind of, I don't know, you're approaching life in a vastly different way. But I don't think it should I don't think politics, unless you, again, have like truly vile, hateful politics, I don't think someone's conservatism, libertarianism, whatever, should discount them as like a person that you are able to interact with and, potentially get to know.
But date? I feel like you're being very careful about that. Interact with. But do you mean like...
No, I don't. I mean, date... But I'm kind of like lumping like dating, being acquaintances with, like
Got
being
you, got
family
you.
members with, you know, like
Yeah,
there's and obviously these are all different types of relationships. Also, I don't know, personally, I am a glutton for debate. So I really enjoy, like, if I meet someone that I disagree with, I'm like, ooh, we're going to
Let's
get into
go.
it. And I am
Oh,
going to enjoy
okay.
that, you know?
Oh, I'm the total opposite. I don't I get so stressed. I hate debating. Like I can like write out all my thoughts in like a dissertation and like a very like lovely like argumentative something and send it out into the ether, but I do not like debating people that I'm going to be intimate with, right? Of course, like having friends or coworkers or family members or casually dating somebody, I can get into a debate. But if it's someone that I'm going to be building a partnership and an intimate life with, I personally definitely would need them to align with me politically. But I do want to just say about Greg Kinnear's character. So in that very scene, or when they break up, because he says, I could never date someone who didn't care about politics or whatever the line is, then he breaks up with Meg Ryan. And she's like, is there someone else? Is it that, you know, that talk show host who interviewed you a couple scenes back? And he's like, yeah. And Meg Ryan was like, is she a Republican? And Greg Kinnear goes, I just can't help myself.
Yes.
So I think he
Oh, I
would
didn't even
answer
clock
this.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he would answer this question even like, you know, his character is definitely presented as like the annoying guy who cares about politics, the annoying liberal, the like what is
The nut from
granddaddy
the
and-
Observer.
the nut from the Observer, the Upper West Side liberal, like pseudo intellectual, whatever. Like he's obsessed with his typewriter and he's such a Luddite. And he's like, you know, even he gives in to this idea of like love is love at the end. He can't help himself. He's going to date this Republican, you know, talking head.
And I think it's an interesting, I do think that question of like, can you date someone with your politics is interesting, it's crucial to the movie, because if the answer is no, I would want to value-wise align, then we don't have our ending. So like it's like necessary to prove that point that like, again, love transcends. It almost speaks to a further more dangerous topic idea, which is that like politics are not personal. They keep saying business is not personal, and I think behind that is politics are not personal. And this need to detach love and dating and personal life and anything that we really care about from politics. So there's never really any talk of like the real world material consequences of shutting down this store, of anything that's going on. It kind of is more like this ideological, this is going to be hard. And then on the ideological factor, at that same scene where we find out that Birdie is low-key in love with a fascist, not only that, she's filthy rich. So she's there
loaded.
like she's loaded. And this is who
That
Kathleen Kelly has been.
brownstone, my God.
And she says it.
She says it too, yeah. She's like, I invested in Intel.
Yes, like, I bought Intel at 6.
Yeah, at 6. And she's been going to her like, what do I do? And this Birdie's been fucking with her. She could care less. She's like, I don't know. What numbers? Like, and so she says at that meeting, which I thought was interesting as well, when she's like, I think I'm going to close the store. And we're like, oh, that's sad. But then she's like, closing the store is the brave thing to do. You're daring to imagine that you could have a different life. You're marching into the unknown, armed with nothing. Like, again, another moment to just like gaslight us as an audience where we're like, oh no, why this is really bad. It's like, oh no, audience. It's actually good. It's brave. Give up on all your dreams. Just give in.
It's also, maybe unintentionally emblematic of like that thing that happens when a super rich person or like a retired person or, you know, someone who like just an older generation person who doesn't live in the current everyday struggles is just like, go ahead and that's not that hard. What's the problem? Go ahead and do it. And it's like, you have no actual perspective on what this entails whatsoever. Why should I should never ever listen to you. You have no idea what you're talking about.
And then at the end, she's like, at the very, very end, one of the things she mentions is, I'm a writer. I'm going to write a children's book. Who'd have ever thought? And I think we're almost meant to believe that, like, if Joe Fox hadn't destroyed her life and taken away this business, she never would have realized her true dream, which was to write a children's book, which is absolutely ridiculous because she could have written a children's book. She was friends with many authors, many publishers. She could have done it while running her store. She didn't have to hit rock bottom and like lose the one thing that reminded her of her mother and, you know, lose her business and be gaslit and manipulated by this terrible man. She could have just written a children's book. We didn't need all of this to happen for her to get there.
Yeah, I know we're not done ripping Joe Fox apart, but since we're on Kathleen Kelly, there were just two things that I just need to say about our dear Kathleen Kelly. One is because, yes, Meg Ryan is so charming, but if you really listen, you're like, she's pretty unbearable for me as like a character. First, I agree. The line that I just like cannot stop thinking about is when she just has this thing about like 22-year-olds, and she has her thing about Kathleen Kelly. And he doesn't say both last name, like her last name, which granted, it's a great last name. I'm Rivka Rivera. I like the double R. She has the double K. I get it. But her response is, you know, don't they know you're talking about 22-year-olds? Don't they know you're supposed to have a last name? It's like an entire generation of cocktail waitresses. And that just makes me think she's the type of woman to be like, wear more clothes. Like, what's your problem? And like, which makes sense because she then continues to, as Joe Fox's behavior is more and more ridiculous. And as this man who she's supposed to meet, who she's been talking to on the internet, she doesn't even know yet it's Joe Fox, doesn't show up. She keeps making excuses for him. Just like, you know, he must have a really good reason. Like, if this is 2023, anyone watching is like, it's a scammer, it's a catfish. Like, people would know better. Like, you're crazy. Has he asked you for a bunch of money yet? But she's just making all these excuses. And it was another moment where another thing she said was like, no matter what he's done to me, there's no excuse for my behavior. And that also felt like another sort of this sort of like beginning of like this neoliberal narrative of like, you know, when they go low, we go high, no matter what. And I was like, you know what? Sometimes when they go low, you got to go low because it's called standing up for yourself. So that's my rant on KK.
I agree. She's totally unbearable. I completely agree. It's similar to Tom Hanks in that they're both so charming, but her dialogue is unbearable. And she has a lot of internalized misogyny. I think she's very like white liberal boomer lady of like, I will just let the man do whatever, even though I am intelligent and I have read and I have opinions, but I can't say them because there's no excuse for that, right? There's a generation of, I think, white liberal boomer ladies who have been raised and brainwashed into blaming them. And, you know, still, I think if you're a femme person in this world, you're brainwashed into existing that way. But her in particular, she says multiple times, there's no excuse for speaking to someone that way. And what bums me out so much is she writes in her emails often about wanting to be brave. And I really wanted her to find her voice. I really wanted her to be brave. And she does a little bit when she asks Frank to, do something very unethical and write about her store in The Observer. And she gets a rally going and you see her going around her little bookstore, like punching and trying to like amp herself up. And you're like, you know what, maybe she's going to be brave. She's going to find her voice. And then we're led to believe at the end, or at least this is how I interpreted it, that her bravery in the end was being brave enough to fall in love with someone who may not seem like the right person to be with, rather than fighting for her business, fighting for herself, fighting for her integrity. She also doesn't have any friends. Her friends seem to be the people who work at the bookstore, and they refer to the business as a family a number of times, which is a huge red flag. Even though you know, they seem like they really love each other. I'm like, Meg Ryan, where are your friends? Is your only friend like this 20-year-old girl from Miss Congeniality who is in college writing papers? You know, the trope of the best friend to the leading lady was noticeably absent in this movie. And
that's such a great point, because hopefully the best friend would have been like, what are you doing?
Exactly. They amp her up. They love it. They're like, oh, he stood you up. He probably didn't have a phone. There's no voice of reason for her at all. And maybe it's because she's their boss, essentially, right? Like they're like, you know, they're friends, but at the end of the day, it's her bookstore and they're her employees.
It's so funny that you both say that, because I had a little bit more sympathy for Kathleen on this watch. I thought,
okay.
Yeah, I found her to be like, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you're saying about like, I didn't vote, I got a manicure, and you know, like the internalized misogyny, a lot of that, like apologizing for, you know, standing up for herself to Tom Hanks, who has been such a prick to her this whole, like halfway through the movie, the whole thing is like, he's such a prick to her every time they see each other. And she's telling him online, like, this guy is such a prick to me. I wish I could just like I wish I could just get him back. And then she finally does. And she like gets a zinger off on him and puts him in his place. And that's when she's like, oh, I really feel bad that I was mean to that guy who's been such a prick to me. So I agree with all that. Although the one difference I feel is that I found her to be like incredibly sincere, Kathleen as a character, like dangerously sincere for this world, for this hyper-capitalist market. Because, you know, when they say her employees are a family, I do believe that she believes that. I mean, she's probably doesn't have like profit sharing set up with them, but, you know, we can excuse that. But she just wants to like be the bookstore in the neighborhood and do a righteous service and, you know, have community and all of these things. And she wasn't built for this competition. She wasn't built for this market. And that is, I think that's okay. Like, it's okay for people not to be a fucking shark, not to be like, I'm a business, you know, I know how to do business, because it's not natural. It is not natural for us to be like, you know what my modus operandi is to like suss out where my competition is and fucking kill them, like ruin these other people's lives. And like, that is so antithetical to her being as a character. So that I had a lot of sympathy for her in that like, Joe Fox is like, I'm a piece of shit, I'm gonna put you out of business. And she's like, and she even says at the beginning, she's like, maybe there's gonna be room for both of us. Like, there'll be room for our store and the Fox books. And it's kind of all crystallized. I wanted to play this one clip from the end in that scene, Robin, that you mentioned, where Joe breaks into her apartment again, like a full-blown psychopath. Because there's this refrain that Joe keeps saying, and we've heard it before from capitalists. It's one of their favorites that justifies the horrendous way they're able to treat people, which is, it's not personal, it's just business. And Joe says this to her multiple times, and he says it to her again after he has put her out of business. He says it, and then this is how Kathleen responds.
It wasn't personal.
What is that supposed to mean? I'm so sick of that. All that means is that it wasn't personal to you, but it was personal to me. It's personal to a lot of people. I mean, what is so wrong with being personal anyway?
God, I love Meg Ryan.
Love Meg Ryan. And that's a really true human sentiment, and one that I agree with. Like, one business can destroy the livelihoods of another business and say it's, you know, it wasn't personal, but there are still destroyed livelihoods. There are people who lost their income. There are people who lost their health insurance. It has a human impact.
I think that's a great point. And you know what, Frank? I was like getting ready to come at you in the middle, and I was like, oh, I like where this is. I kind of feel where this is going. But then at the end, I was like, except that she says that shit, and then she is like, I don't care about politics. She's just so disconnected is my problem, that I'm like, it's all personal then, so whatever. But I hear you.
Yeah, and then she ends up falling for him at the end anyway, so it kind of, you know, again, it
She's
totally
trying.
softens it's like all of the terrible things we've seen Joe Fox do, all of the lying, all the manipulating he's done to her, all the gaslighting, the the pathological lying. Again, fucking psychopath. This character is a psychopath who happens to be played by Tom Hanks. That is the only
Correct.
redeemable thing about him. And at the end, she's like, I do love this guy. What can I say?
That's the thing. I think I do like the character despite her flaws. I just wish she had been given a bitter ending by the writer. I don't dislike her for falling in love with him. I'm frustrated that is the direction that the movie decided to take in the last 8 minutes, because it does happen so very fast. You're like, what? She's what? It's like whiplash. You're like, oh, okay. I guess we're getting coffee and we're going to a farmer's market, and now we're in love, and now you want it to be him. Like, it's so fast. It's like we don't even get any breathing room to come around to him, which I probably wouldn't have anyway. It's like she doesn't get a chance to really wrestle with the fact that Joe Fox is her online lover. She gets like she gets like an 8-minute end of movie montage essentially where they're eating apples and drinking coffee. And it's I wish she was given more. I wish she was done better by Nora Ephron, really.
Truly. I just wanted to throw in just talking about, because I thought watching this in the context, it was like really special to get to watch this today in the context of AI and the fact that we're watching this film knowing that like the internet is just, I mean, it's called You've Got Mail. Like it's so charming to revisit this time when you're like, I think you said this, Robin, like it's sort of this very like tiny window where things could still be a little bit charming. Nobody really knows fully the dangers of catfishing or like, you know, where this thing is going to go. There's potential. In 98, actually, according to Pew Research Center, only 41% of adults went online. And when asked, 57% of non-internet users said they worry not at all about missing out on something by not going online. So like it's a wildly different landscape. And it's just wild to be watching it now when, you know, I think one of the lines in the store is like, hey, are you online? Like, you online? You know, which now it's the air we breathe. And you hear that echoed today where people are like, are you on ChatGPT? Have you done this thing? And we're living in this wild time where I've probably said this before on the podcast, so I don't know. I was thinking about Frank, not our Frank here, but Frank from the movie being like, if Frank had a TikTok, Frank would be going nuts right now. And he would probably be in my algorithm just being like ringing the alarm about ChatGPT and about AI. And like this, if he thought that was scary, like poor Frank would be. So I just thought that was, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like, I just was like, this is so special and such almost like a necessary rewatch for people at this time.
I agree. And I think on that, Joe Fox is actually kinder in his emails. Like his internet persona is a lot nicer than his real life persona. And I think today in 2023, the opposite is true for most people, where people will be very cordial and nice in real life, but then like fucking like demolish you in the comment section or start trolling people or say things like make TikToks and say things that they would never say to a person's face, right? Or you know, they get up all in celebrities for stupid drama, right? Or they do really dark things, right? Like they join 4chan or like incel groups online, or they actually catfish people in a really negative way. But Joe Fox, who is a terrible person in real life, is being kind of sweet to her over email. He's giving her advice. He's talking about wanting to send her, you know, school supplies in bouquet form. And I think it's really like indicative of how, yeah, it was a very charming time. We didn't know what it would be. And people were perhaps, I mean, I was very young. I don't know. I don't have any evidence to support this, but perhaps people were sweeter. Also, the movie really captures, there's that one scene where Kathleen Kelly is about to write an email and then she gets an IM from Joe Fox and she wasn't expecting him to be on. And like that moment of like your crush IMing you, I had such a flashback. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that was what it felt like when you just got an IM from your crush that you weren't expecting.
Bam Sport, if you're listening, Bam Sport.
Wow.
What a time to be alive.
Like I still
Dropping
remember
the handle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Most likely will not listen, but if you listen.
Hit Rivka up.
Well, but I mean, you're right. It's so visceral that like, and the sound and all of it.
Oh yeah, when the door opening closing sound from AIM, it was just like, who is it? Who just logged on? Oh my God, is it my crush? Whew. Yeah.
I'm gonna come home and sit here in front of the screen until someone
just wait.
Oh my God, and you would like you would personalize the way that your font looked and the way that you typed, and you could like personalize all this stuff. And it was like, wow, have you seen like Nick's font? Oh my God, it's like so edgy and cool. No, this was the honeymoon period of the internet when it was all just in front of us. Like most technological advancements, you know, there's that first little bit of time where you're like, the steam engine, you know, or the combustible engine, this will be a really good thing that helps a lot of people. And then it destroys the livable climate. Same thing with the internet and destroying so many different things. But yeah, it was a really lovely snapshot to a simpler time. All right, Robin. Well, this is the point in the show where we like to give out awards for this movie. Our first award is called A Point with a View. This goes to the character with the best politics in the movie.
So I think the easiest answer is Greg Kinnear's character or Frank. However, he does decide to date like who I guess we're believed to be is like a Fox News type like talk show host at the end. So just to be chaotic, I'm just going to say Brinkley the dog because Brinkley has no understanding of capitalism and loves everybody. Yeah, I think everybody in this movie is kind of a terrible person.
They all are kind of shitty in one way or another. I think that's good. I think a dog always has perfect politics. I am going to give this to Frank only because there's stuff about Frank that sucks. Like the giving up his values is like in a second when he's like, I'll date this woman. He's kind of has his head up his own ass. He's like he's very highfalutin. But I was surprised to see, because like he's like a leftist, I am to presume, like I was surprised to see in a 90s movie, you know. He's like extremely anti-corporate. He confronts Joe Fox at the party and says, how do you sleep at night? He's an expert on Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the Soviet spies that were executed in the US. So I was like, oh, damn, like Frank is a socialist. He's like a leftist. So for that, I will give it to Frank.
Yeah, my vote's going for Frank as well. Although it was interesting in this rewatch, it just stood out to me that the first line of the movie is Frank's. And he's like, the entire workforce of the state of Virginia had to have solitaire removed from their computers because they hadn't done any work in 6 weeks. And I was like, oh, it's very like you're concerned about the level of work getting done. Like it was just seemed so. And so maybe that's also just the writers not fully understanding like a leftist perspective, you know, and not really being able to write that character, you know. So I'll give that. But yes, for all the reasons you said, and just that he at least is the like stands up for the shop around the corner. So yes, it's to Frank and to Brinkley. So our second award is Despicable You. Now this goes to the character with the worst politics in the movie. We've named a few already, but Robin, who are you giving this award to?
Oh boy, it's got to be either Tom Hanks's dad, Tom Hanks, but also Birdie, like fucked a genocidal monster. So do you know, like, you know, it's got to be like a 3-way tie for me. I don't know. I mean, Joe Fox is the easy choice, but I think he's just like his dad and his grandpa, so you can't give it to him without giving it to them.
Yeah, I was going to say the entire Fox family, except save the kids. All the Fox men.
Although, let's get real.
That little girl singing Tomorrow.
We know where they're headed. Okay.
She can be in there too.
Most likely they're not turning out great. We know how this goes. But yeah, all of but that's a good point. Like, is it the Fox men? Is it the corporate parasite misogynists? Or is it Birdie, the fascist sympathizer? I don't know. I don't know what is. I genuinely don't know what's worse.
I will make it easy for everybody and give it to 50 red flags. Joe Fox. Break the tie. I'm just gonna give it to my guy.
And our final award is A Star is Scorned. This goes to the supporting character that this movie should actually be about.
I have a very specific and niche answer for this.
Oh,
in
good.
the scene at Zabar's, where Tom Hanks is so charming to Rose, there is a man behind Meg Ryan who really wants her to hurry the F up and get out so he can cook his Thanksgiving meal. And he continually inserts himself into that scene. And I had to rewind it and watch it again because I laughed so hard at his line deliveries. His name is Henry. He introduces himself because Tom Hanks is like, I'm Joe. Rose, it's a beautiful name, Rose. And he's like, and I'm Henry. So I want to see Henry's adventures on Thanksgiving. Where is he off to? Why is he in such a rush? Why is he in such a bad mood? What is he buying? And what does he think of this very annoying man and very annoying woman in front of him holding up the line?
That's a great one.
It's a really good one.
I'm giving it to Patricia Eden, Parker Posey's character. She's like pitch perfect in this. I just love this character. And this was like, this worked for me, the dichotomy of she's obsessed with Frank and his writing. She's like, one of her lines at the parties when she's like, oh, she loves everything he's written just because it's smart, but she doesn't actually know. She's like, and I have no idea what it means. And her line at the party where she talks about Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, and she's like, I just think it's so interesting how old they look. At that, like, that's her fact. She's like, and that they looked
She's like, but they're really our age.
But they're
look
really
so
our
old."
age. And Parker Posey's just so brilliant at, like, there's always a piece of her, but this character is like, you're like, it's still distinctly Parker Posey, but it's just like a very distinct character and one that I loved. And she figured out how to fit her sort of like essence into this rom-com Nora Ephron world. So shout out to Patricia. What about you, Frank?
Parker Posey, one of the best to ever do it. I am giving this to Christina, which is one of Meg Ryan's, one of Kathleen's employees.
Oh, yeah.
It's all based on one line, because at one point when they're talking about how the bookstore could close, she says, and then I'm going to have to move to Brooklyn. And that is racially coded, I think. I think that
Totally.
is very much the white woman being like, I don't want to have to go move to Brooklyn where the non-white people live. So I want to see her fucking have to move to Brooklyn and get her world rocked and just like completely lose her white privilege. That's the movie that I want to see.
That's a good one. And nobody
Yeah,
wants
I
to
don't-
see Dave Chappelle's movie, or maybe they do, but we've already seen it. Moving on. I don't even know why. I just felt like I had to say it, and I'm like, why are you? Don't even. Okay, well, I think
It needed to
there's
be mentioned.
clearly it needed to be mentioned. There's clearly so much that we could, I think, just keep going. But alas, we shan't for today, because we are going to get into another interesting topic, which is what we always like to ask our guests at the end, is to just, talk a little bit about, as you've mentioned, you're an anti-capitalist, and how, and actually we started kind of talking about this at the top, but how your values as an anti-capitalist are, you try to live them out in your day-to-day, even as complex as that might be. Is there one thing that you want to share with us, or maybe a few things you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think just going back to our conversation at the top, I also, Frank, thank you for making clear that there are a million ways to be an artist, and you don't have to be in the slog to be an artist. You don't have to do it professionally. But I also, anyone who's listening who is a professional artist, I don't want me saying this is not for me anymore to sound like I'm like, oh, my values are, I can't do that anymore. We live in an imperfect capitalist system, and we make choices. And if I just wanted to clarify that, that if you're choosing to be a commercial actor, you are certainly not the person behind those corporations making those commercials. You got to live your life, survive, and make your art. I think just a really simple thing I do is I truly wear like my clothes until they break. Like I try to practice sustainability and not be consumerist. And I have literally had boots fall apart on me while walking in them. A very small thing you can do. Also, my partner and I made our own soap this past weekend, and so
Ooh.
much came of it. It was a really fun little artistic activity with, fresh lavender and stuff like that. I want to plug, I don't actually know this person, but I love this Substack called The Unpublishable by Jessica DeFino. Jessica is a journalist who has written for a lot of fashion magazines, and now has her own Substack, which is an anti-beauty culture, anti-capitalist Substack. And she examines the ways that beauty culture is essentially like a scaffolding for capitalism, colonialism, racism, patriarchy, in ways you may not consider, especially as a former actor, where, what you are your brand, you are your product. And as a person who is raised as a woman in this country, like it's really beaten into us that in order to be of value, we must present it a certain way. And I think anyone interested in dissecting that should go ahead and subscribe to Jessica DeFino's Substack. I find it really interesting, especially because she has that insider perspective, having worked for these magazines and having worked for the Kardashians themselves.
Ooh.
Wow. That's awesome, Robin. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm looking forward to checking out those resources.
Robin, where can our audience find you and your work?
I am on Instagram at __ Robin Johnson. It's ROBIN. And that's probably the best place to find me right now. As we've discussed, I'm going through a little bit of an artistic reawakening. So any website is under construction. That's the best place to find me.
Awesome. This was such a pleasure. Thank you for picking this movie. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the perspectives and making me laugh and watching this terrifying movie.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you've been enjoying the show, please consider becoming a supporter. You can find all of that info at mvcpod.com.
For next week's movie, we'll be watching the 2020 Best Picture winner, Parasite.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.